Hello everybody, this is Niclas Huschenbeth and today I'm analyzing the game from round number 7, Nakamura versus Topalov, and we'll dive right into it. Both players on the bottom of the table with 2 out of 6 before the round, so both players looking for their first win. Let's see if any of the two got it. Nakamura with the white piece starting with d4, and we see the Slav opening, e3, bishop f5, knight c3, e6, knight h4. White grabs the bishop here. On the other hand, black obtains the h-file, so there's kind of an equal exchange. And here white has so many moves to choose from. The two main moves are g3 and bishop d2, but actually Nakamura goes for rook b1. And what's funny about this is that the player who first played this move was Topalov in 2006 against Kramnik in the World Championship match. So Topalov introduced this move, and now Nakamura uses it against him. So you can expect Topalov to be kind of familiar with this move. Played knight bd7, c5. So the whole idea of rook b1 was to prepare c5 and then to be ready to go b4 and to already have the rook out of the way of the a file and have b1, where it will be more useful because it's supporting b4 and b5, and then we'll be ready to take action on the b file once it's open. So it's a kind of long-term preparation move. Now a5 makes a lot of sense. Most of the time people play e5 here, immediately play in the center, which is the typical response if your opponent plays and closes the center and tries to play on one side. In this case, white tries to play on the queen side, then the typical response is to open the center and create counterplay in the center. But here white plays b4 and goes on and plays on the queen side. So what a5 does, it allows black to open up the a file, or rather forces white to open up the a file, and then black can use this to sometimes activate the rook. So a5 I think makes a lot of sense. a3, white prepares b4 once again. In the game between Topalov and Kramnik from 2006, Kramnik played e5 here immediately, which is also possible, but Topalov went bishop e7. Now g3, the bishop will go to g2, e5, bishop g2, and now Topalov also closes down in the center, plays e4, because there's really not much to do. If black takes on d4, well, that only helps white, opening up the bishop, and white still has this space advantage on the queen side. Also remember, black has given up a bishop, so it makes a lot of sense to close the position, because the general rule is knights better perform in a closed position than an open one, and vice versa. Bishops are usually better or stronger in an open position with lots of diagonals and files. So b4, takes b4, takes b4, knight f8, Topalov regroups the knight. Oh, I want to point one thing out here, I forgot. In this position, another interesting move is b5. And to me, this move makes a lot of sense. Because after all, the whole white idea is to play b4, b5. So here if white plays b4, obviously he's not getting anywhere. And black doesn't even have to take on b4, but just saying white is not getting b5 and the rook on b1 is not doing anything. So there's no more play on the queen side. The only thing black has to watch out in certain moments are piece sacrifices, such as the knight being sacrificed on b5 for 2 pawns. But if black prevents that, he should be fine here. So I think b5 was an interesting move, because c takes b6 really doesn't help white that much. As queen takes b6 and black looks completely fine. Okay, so e4 was played. b4, takes b4, takes b4, and instead of knight f8, once again black had this option to go b5 here. I would rather do that probably, but I'm not that familiar with the position, so I'm not sure if there's anything wrong with it. Once again, white doesn't want to take on b6 here because of knight takes b6, and the knight is ready to jump to c4, and this looks quite comfortable for black. Probably f3 is the choice here, and it seems white might be a little bit more comfortable here. But again, black is quite solid as well. Okay, knight f8, b5, knight e6, and bishop d2. Bishop d2 is just a waiting move, developing the bishop on c1, and white wants to wait until black has decided to castle, because if white was to castle right now, maybe black wouldn't castle and just keep the rook on the open, half open h file, maybe do something like g5, g4, who knows, right? And somehow tries to get an attack in. So simply a smart decision here to first play bishop d2 and see what black reacts, and now black castles. White doesn't castle quite yet. Instead, Nakamura chooses to go knight a4, looking forward to maybe bring the knight to b6. Knight g5, and now h4, kind of provoking the next move for black. h4 wasn't necessary, but it's also a quite reasonable move. The alternative, the natural alternative, was knight b6. Threatening the rook, rook has to move, rook a7, and now just castling. And here it looks also quite comfortable for white, because black has no way really to get the queen into play. You see that the queen would like to go to f5, for example, and help kind of initiate some kind of attack against the white king, but both squares obviously are taken by the knight, so it's not so easy for black to create any kind of play on the king side. At the same time, white is looking forward to create some threats against the pawn c6 and to start his play on the queen side, which will of course also take some time, but it seems white might be a little bit faster. Okay, h4, and now knight f3, and okay, this has to be taken. And of course white cannot take right now because the knight is hanging on a4. So Nakamura takes on c6 first and then retreats with the knight to c3. Now obviously this pawn is hanging. And here Topalov sacrificed a piece, which is quite incredible, and it's really interesting. And I wouldn't say that it's a mistake, it just makes things very complicated. Instead, the alternative was to go queen d7, and black has certainly some compensation here for the pawn, because the light squares in the white position are quite weak. You can see all the white pawns are on dark squares, and white also has the dark square bishop left, which is quite passive and not really participating in any meaningful way. Here bishop d8 looks like a good idea, and then bishop a5, looking forward to exchange the knight on c3, and then black is left with the strong knight, which has an outpost on e4, and black certainly has compensation, but at the same time white is better here. That should be clear, because white is up a pawn after all. But let's see what happened in the game. Bishop takes c5. Okay, d takes c5, now d4, and black makes use of the fact that white hasn't castled yet. E takes d4, and queen takes d4. An interesting alternative was to go rook e8 here, bishop e3, and now rook a3, rook b3 should be played, and then takes, and queen takes d4. But I can understand why Topalov maybe didn't want to go for this, because he exchanges more material. Another pair of rooks comes off the board, and the less material on the board, obviously the less attacking potential for black. But still, black has compensation here. And it's not that easy for white. This pawn on f3 is a major problem, and all the time white cannot castle because of queen h3 followed by checkmate, so this is something to keep in mind. Knight b2 here, knight d5, quite unclear. White might be objectively better, but definitely not easy to play this position. Let's return to the game. Topalov took on d4 immediately, and now white just castled. And black doesn't bother with the pawn on c5 here, obviously. At the same time, of course, the pawn on f3 is also hanging. This pawn is so important. Black keeps it by playing queen g4, and is now always ready if the right moment comes to play queen h3. Now rook e1. Of course black cannot go queen h3 yet, because then white is just able to take on f3, and the queen also defends against any kind of threats here quite easily. So instead rook fd8, good move, pinning the bishop on d2, and now also threatening rook takes d2. If white was careless, let's say rook b7, then rook takes d2, queen takes d2, and queen h3, because the queen has been distracted from attacking this pawn f3, and now white cannot defend against queen g2 checkmate. So, which is why Nakamura played rook b2. Now rook d4, another good move, centralize the rook. The idea is sometimes to sacrifice on h4, and of course black wants to double on the d-file, put more pressure on this bishop on d2. And here Nakamura goes rook e7, which is an inaccuracy, but a very human and natural move. Instead, rook e3 might give white still chances, but not that much. And I think with right play, this position is actually equal. Here after rook e3, black plays rook d8, and now knight b1, knight e4, and now there are major exchanges. Black regains the piece, and in this arising rook endgame, white wins the pawn on c6, but I don't think it should be enough for white to win this. After rook c2, it seems black should be able to hold. Quite sure. Okay. So instead Nakamura went rook e7, with the idea that after rook d8, queen b3, the queen moves out of the pin on the d-file with tempo, because white is threatening queen takes f7 followed by queen takes g7 checkmate, which is also why black doesn't have time to go queen h3. So black has to defend this and just goes rook f8, very simple rook f8 move, which looks passive, but again black has these threats in a position, namely big threat queen h3 again, because white is not attacking a pawn on f3. So Nakamura decided to move the knight out of the way to keep an eye on this pawn on f3, but knight d1 is actually another inaccuracy and could have led to a better position for black. Instead, white could either just go back with queen e1, repeat moves like that, or go king h2. And here black has to find some more precise moves. Queen f5 first of all, opening up knight g4 to kick the king out of h2 so that the queen can come back to h3. For example, bishop g5 now, then knight g4 and knight e5, and white has to go back to h2 to defend against queen h3. Or here queen d1, and now queen h5. And why queen h5 now? Because now white cannot reply with bishop g5, which was possible to move earlier because the bishop is pinned. And now there's the threat rook takes h4, quite a strong threat. And white should react by playing queen f1, and this leads to a perpetual now, because white cannot move the queen in between because of knight g4 followed by queen takes h3. Alright, let's see what happened in the game. Knight d1, Nakamura takes his chances, tries what can be tried in a position, and indeed Topalov doesn't go wrong directly, but afterwards. So he plays knight d5 here, quite a human move, attacking rook on e7, but instead queen f5 was quite strong, and the whole point is to play rook d3 followed by queen h3 once again. And white has to be careful here as well. White has to play rook e3. If knight e3 for example, then queen h3 and knight g4 is a devastating threat. And after queen d1, which copes with knight g4, there's knight d5, double attack, and white loses a rook and is obviously losing. So rook e3 hits the pawn on f3, but now there are too many pieces excuse me, on a d file, bishop and knight, and white cannot keep them all, so he has to go rook f3. Takes, takes, takes. We have this position. Black has equalized material, but is a little bit better because of safer king, and also this pawn on c5 could be a target. So the black position is preferred here, but it's not by much, and white should be able to hold. But what a turn of tables, right? After being down a piece, black is suddenly in a superior position. Okay, so let's look at knight d5. Now, rook e5. And here black again had different ways to continue, but king h7 was not one of them, because that really leads to a losing position now. Two ways. Either knight f6, simply go back, and surprisingly there's no way for white to continue really, because of these threats that are still in a position here. Queen h3 always something to look out for, as well as queen d7 now is actually a threat right now, because the rook is not covering d7 anymore from e7, and white doesn't have anything here. The other move, which seems very natural to me, is rook a8, and the whole point is that it prevents king h2, because if now king h2, then black can sacrifice the exchange on d2 to open up knight f4, and here this will lead in a repetition of moves. Obviously white cannot take because of checkmate, and after king g1 there's knight e2 and king h2 and knight f4. And the important point is that in this position white cannot take on e2 because of take takes, knight c3, and now there's rook a1. That's why black had to move the rook over to a8. So he has this rook a1 followed by e1 queen, and black's winning. So rook a8 would have been a good choice here, and also very natural to just get this rook that's not in the play right now on f8, get it back into the game. Honestly, I'm not quite sure what Topalov tried to do by playing king h7. I haven't understood the position that well, but all I know is that it didn't work. And it's funny actually, white mirrors this by playing king h2, but king h2 is so much stronger, and king h7 takes this idea out of the position with queen h3, and also black doesn't have an easy way to get rid of this king now, because unlike earlier the knight cannot come to g4 that easily, because it's on d5 now instead of on f6. So Topalov tries to get his knight to g4, now playing knight f6, but it's just too slow. Best try would have been f5 to maybe get something going with f4 and still mud the water. Is that the right expression? Mutter the water? Something along these lines. But also here white is clearly on top. Bishop e3, rook b4, queen d3, but okay. Black can try, play for tricks, and who knows in time travel what could happen, right? Instead knight f6, now bishop e3, and here black should retreat with the rook d7, but the black initiative is gone. White has regrouped his pieces, and it's just not working out for black anymore. Also notice that this queen really doesn't have a good square to go. I'm just noticing this. The queen doesn't have any place to go right now. So can open up knight g4 for the knight. Oh god. Alright. Instead, Topalov tried rook b8, but it just doesn't work. Queen takes, rook takes. Of course, you have to be careful here. Rook h1 is the threat, or queen h3, either one. But rook b1 defends against both threats successfully. And that's it. Queen d7. Last try here. Threatening knight g4. And rook takes d1 would be a devastating mistake now, because knight g4 would lead to checkmate. King h3, knight takes f2. And there's a checkmate. But how to prevent knight g4? Quite simple really. Rook g5, and White is up so much material that of course he can give back in exchange. After knight g4, rook takes g4, rook takes b1, queen takes b1, queen takes g4. Well, white is still up just a whole piece and no more play, and that's it. So Topalov decided to resign after rook g5. Exciting game. You could really see Topalov's creativity in this game, but in the critical moments that followed, he missed out. First with queen f5 after rook e7, and then king h7, which is a little bit mysterious to me because I haven't quite understood the purpose, except for maybe getting off the 8th rank or preventing any queen takes f7 check moves, but that just was not the right move at the right time, and then he was just losing. Quite a comeback on the other hand for Nakamura after his loss in the 6th round, where he lost quite unfortunately against Levon Aronian. So Nakamura scores his first win, but still -1 with 3 out of 7. Alright, I hope you guys enjoyed this analysis, and I'll see you again soon. Goodbye.